The way people think about this is for me to spend an extra $150,000, I am going to basically get a rental of almost say $350 or $400 per week, And so if you look at the numbers, like just very high level, and this is how people sell them, right? $350 per week is $18,200. You're spending about $150,000 in, say granny. That's whooping 12% rental yield. That's amazing, And so that's how they are basically sold into this idea. And of course, on paper, that makes a lot more sense. But understand that whenever you are going to build a granny at the back, the banks do not value the house on top. You're listening to Helpmebuy Property Podcast, powered by Investor Partner Group. We help improve lifestyles by building scalable and sustainable generational wealth and passive income streams. We do this via our ecosystem that is a one-stop shop to all property investment needs, from evidence-based, data-driven buyer's agency, industry-renowned portfolio reviews and property strategies, property development with and for clients, tax, SMSF, business structures advisory, and cash flow real estate. Everything we do is to help people achieve financial independence and not just basic financial freedom by using property as a tool and as a medium. Presently, we've launched Australian Property Academy, where we are training and teaching buyer's agents, property advisors, property strategic partners, and secrets to finding investor-grade properties to student investors. Connect now to experience it yourself or drop in a line below at info@helpmebuy.com.au to get more information. Be kind and happy investing. Today's topic is a stereotype that we are going to break. When are granny flats and converted rooming houses a bad idea? And why or why not should you steer clear of them? It's such a clickbait topic though, because granny flats and converted rooming houses are loved by buyers agents. They create awesome cash flows. There is a silver lining to it where they are good and bad at the same time. So when can they be the cash cows and when can they be the money drain? That is what we are going to discuss today. Now, before I open up the floor, let's drum roll, introduce our co-host, Miss Cheryl. Cheryl, how are you today?
Hello, Moss. I'm amazing. Would you like to buy a vowel? I feel like I'm in Wheel of Fortune. As like, okay, let's find out what's behind the letters. Yeah, we get this question all the time. Should I put this? Because people want to add value to their properties, and fair enough, because it's at yields an all-time low at the moment because interest rates have gone up. So people are going, if I want to hold the property, what do I do? How do I add value? And sometimes it's sort of, I guess the whole point is sometimes it's a great idea and sometimes it's not a great idea. So let's dive into it, shall we? What are we going to kick off with? We're going to talk about granny flats and going to talk about rooming houses.
Help the users and listeners understand what a granny flat is and why are they poised as a solution to the housing crisis?
Yeah, so granny flats are not only where you put your grannies, right? They used to be where you put granny.
One way.
If it was, I'll tell you, in my situation, our grannies do not want to live in a little 60 square meter flat. At least for as far as I know, in New South Wales, there is a restriction as to how large a granny flat can be. Generally 60 square meters. It can be one, even possibly two bedrooms designed quite well. It can be attached to a property or it can be detached as well. And each state is going to be a little bit different. So make sure you check that out. However, for a long time, people created these sort of granny flats to either house their family, extended family, or to be able to rent out. And interestingly, in Queensland, I don't know if you remember, Mox, like it was only last year where they actually legalized that you could rent out granny flats officially, and everyone went, oh.
We've been doing this for a while.
We've been doing this for a while, but okay. Thank you. So people are renting these out, obviously with the rising popularity of short-term rentals, people are using it as additional income for Airbnbs if it's in lifestyle locations. So that's effectively where granny flats have come from and evolved. And I guess the question is it a good idea to build a granny flat? And let's talk about where you have to add a granny flat as opposed to you already having one, right? Most are talking about and adding on, whether that's a good idea or not. Let's start off with that, and we can talk about converted rooming houses.
Look, one of the things that the state in Victoria is typically also doing is like anything under 60 squares. You don't even need a council permit anymore. You can basically go ahead and basically do it yourself or flat. And so that's pretty interesting and exciting where naturally the councils and the state governments and, you know, the government in itself feels that this is an answer to the housing crisis. And so it's a very stereotype that you're trying to break from an investor's perspective. Does it make sense to build a granny at the back?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the cons and then talk about the pros. I'm always a sort of very negative first and then positive at the very end so that people can actually listen to the very end.
We can be bad cop this time and I'll be good cop. Or maybe I swapped the places last time. I'm really not very good at bad cop. You be bad cop.
Yeah, I think you are always the good girl. I think I'll take the position for the bad guy. Look, I mean, granny flats in today's time with the way the construction costs are going, $150,000 to almost $200,000 to $250,000 is where the granny costs right now in today's time. And so you can understand the amount of cash outlay that is required to build the granny flat, right? So, you know, you don't get typical bank financing them from an existing house. It's usually either a refinance from an existing property or your genuine savings that is basically coming in order to build these in your backyards, right? It's a lot of money, right? To put it into a single property to generate maybe, you know, $300 or $400 per week in rent from a single property. And so I think that's where the position or the conversation typically starts, right?
Yeah. And what does that work out to be? Because we like to look at it from a return on cash investment as well, which it can be quite attractive.
Yes.
However, one of the things is that you can't necessarily finance. It's not like buying a house. You can't finance a granny flat. You can't get like a 80%.
But I mean, you know, naturally, the way people think about this is for me to spend an extra $150,000, I am going to basically get a rental of, you know, almost say $350 or, you know, $400 per week, you know. And so if you look at the numbers, like, you know, just very high level, and this is how people sell them, right? $350 per week is $18,200. You're spending about $150,000 in, you know, say granny. That's whooping 12% rental yield. That's amazing, you know? And so that's how they are basically sold into this idea. And of course, on paper, that makes a lot more sense. But understand that whenever you are going to build a granny at the back, the banks do not value the house on top. So if your house is worth, say $550 and you're putting $150,000 in granny or $200,000 in granny, your house value does not automatically become $700,000. That's not never the case, actually.
What?
And so from bank's perspective, in fact, the valuers come out and they actually value it sometimes at between 80% to 90% of the total value of the money that you have spent over the house. And so there's a lot of money that gets wasted for you to do this exercise. So you're locking in that extra money into the property in order for you to, you know, generate the yield that is required, right? The interesting fact is this, and this is where the story and the game changes quite significantly. And so let's say if you're going to buy a house which have a potential to build a granny at the back, it would be a decent land size with a smaller house at the front typically. And so let's assume that, you know, you're buying a house for $550 at say 5.5% yield, renting at say $580 per week. You put $150,000 granny at the back, that generates an extra $350 per week. The overall rent comes to about $980 per week. But when you look at the average yield between the front and the back, you're only sitting at about 7% yield, right? So you're not sitting at the 12% that people are talking about actually. And so that's where people don't realize and understand that, hey, I've missed out on the money because I've put in an extra $150,000 from my pocket, plus my yield still hasn't gone up effectively from the overall property yield side of things. And I have outlaid almost $290,000 in cash on a small property because, you know, you have 20%.
Doesn't necessarily value up at the
100%.
You know, 200.
Yeah,
the 750 that.
Correct. And so you have reduced your LVR quite significantly of that property because you now have almost $290,000 of your own cash into that property. And and the rest of the debt is basically there. And so your cash on cash return drops quite significantly from that perspective when you're talking about granny flats.
Yeah. And this is taking into, you know, I just want to premise it by saying this is if you're buying a brand new property, like not a brand new, like you're buying a property and then adding a granny flat, as opposed to say if you've had a property for 10 years, 5 or 10 years, and you've increased the value and you've got some equity sitting there that you can that, that you can get access to, that's a different situation, right? And
100%.
Then potentially when you do those numbers, then potentially then that actually makes commercial sense or financial sense.
Don't get yourself taken on a ride by property spookers, so-called property investment advisors, or buyer's agents who are selling house and land packages or off-the-plan properties or apartments. Get yourself a copy of this book called The Millennial's Guide to Property Investing. This book is not just for millennials. The title suggests, but it's actually the most advanced way of investing in property. This book will relate to your clients, your colleagues, and other business owners. There are so many property spookers out there who have come out of the woodwork over the last 3 to 5 years. And there is so much misinformation out there that I had to write a book about all the F-ups that people can actually avoid in order to be super successful in the property investment journey. Some of these are really easy to identify, but they are so costly to fix once these mistakes are made. So it's a short book, it's easy to read, it has a lot of stories, it has a lot of examples, and it is a true guide for people who wants to do it themselves. My name is Moxin Reza. This is my story, and a lot of you will relate to parts of this story if you're not born in the riches and if you're trying to build a property portfolio that can last generations and help you improve your lifestyle along the way. So I give you a chance to come out there and have a read. Be kind, stay safe, keep smiling, keep investing, and please do check out the book. Definitely.
To actually do.
And so I think that's a good segue, right? So when does it actually make sense for you to build the granny at the back? Yeah, of course, if you have a property in your property portfolio and that property has great potential, multiple exit strategies attached to it, you don't want to sell it like one of those beach properties or full-scale development potential properties. It's costing you money and it's making your portfolio stuck. The best way to unstuck your property portfolio is by basically building a granny at the back. Makes complete sense. You have a premium property that you don't want to sell. Yes, you can see consistent growth and this property consistently performing. Of course, it makes a lot more sense to, make it positive cash flow by subsidizing it with equity from other properties or using the equity from an existing property that has grown up in value over the 5 to 6 or 8 years time frame.
Yeah. And if the thing that sort of is holding you back from like holding the property is the yield at the moment, however, there's great potential for capital growth, then you could potentially look at, how do I add value so that I can continue holding on to this property? Take into account if you have existing equity in the property already.
Definitely.
And that you're not overcapitalizing. I think one of the key things is not overcapitalizing once you spent that money as well.
Definitely. And look, some of the crazy things that I've seen is where people have moved houses to the front because the houses were at stumps and building a granny at the back because, they had premium pocket properties, that were significantly negatively geared because they've used that excess equity into other stuff. And so they're like, well, I still don't want to sell it because I'm using this equity. And so how do I protect this property? Because the growth is still going to come through. Imagine like you having a property in Neutral Bay or Chatswood or Roseville, or Rose Hill, some of those areas, or Northern Beaches, right? You don't want to sell that property. Of course, it's a gold mine that you're sitting on. Every passing month, every passing year, the property is going to go up in value and you keep extracting the money out. But this property in itself costs you a lot of money. And so how do you make sure that you're getting some of that relaxation in holding costs out of things?
Yeah. So ultimately what we're saying is do the numbers if it makes sense that you're not overcapitalizing. So let's talk about let's summarize it. You're not overcapitalizing in spending on the granny flat, that you're getting a good return on your actual capital.
Yes.
The yields the yields are worth it. Like I said, if you're doing Airbnb, again, we're not advising on things. If you need to get licenses for stuff, do what you need to do. Whether it's Airbnb, you're getting good rentals and putting money in your pocket, that all makes sense. You probably need to think twice if you're buying not brand new, but right now, and then adding a granny flat to actually see whether that's actually going to add value or not, and if you're overcapitalizing, and in fact, if you're getting the types of yields from the amount of funds that you're putting in. And
100%.
If not, like you definitely consider, well, if I'm going to put in almost 300,000 of cash into this property and I'm only getting 6-7% yield, gross yield, which is not, we're not talking about net yield, is it going to be the best use of my money, or are there other alternatives. And we've talked about other alternatives there as well.
And that's what it comes down to, right? When you have like $300,000 sitting on the side and you are just building up your property portfolio, the granny flat strategy does not make a lot more sense. Typically works in areas which are really high end, or properties which are super blue chip, where you have bought them in your property portfolio. Now you're adjusting your property portfolio to provide scale and sustainability by adding this strategy into your property portfolio. I think it's a perfect strategy for principal place of residence, right? A lot of people buying $3 million homes, I think perfect strategy, right? Build one at the back, Airbnb it out. Yes, be mindful of the capital gains tax side of things. But hey, if you don't never want to sell it, who cares about the CGT side of things? Build one, rent it out, and keep selling it until you die. You pass it on to your kid and you're CGT free. So, but typically I think it's a perfect, game, right?
Put you in the granny flat, right? That's it.
Let's see. That's what I'll be a terrible granny.
Terrible son. That's right. Sorry, all the grannies. Well, okay, let's dive into rooming houses, shall we? So anything else to add to the granny flats? I think we've captured a few sort of pros and cons and things to consider for the granny flat.
Yes. I think rooming houses is the talk of the town right now, if you think about it, right? Everyone is talking about rooming houses. And so help the viewers and listeners understand what is a rooming house. I know we have talked about in a lot of episodes, but just give it a bit of a brief overview. Rooming house, co-living properties, housing with multiple occupants. So many names to this.
That's right. Let's just confuse everyone. There are several different names to it, but I think in terms of what we're talking about, generally it's a property that looks like a normal house. Internally, however, purpose-built rooming houses / co-living / housing of multiple occupations, and that's what they're called in different states. Effectively, sort of small individual rooms that might have an ensuite and might have a small little preparation area as well, that it is meant to be almost like a little studio, not that it is almost like one.
Yeah.
And it might still have in that house a shared kitchen and living and dining area if you want to interact with the rest of the residents that are in the home. So as you can imagine, in some states, they can vary from 5 of these rooms all the way up to 9 bedrooms in Victoria. So just keep an eye on which state you're in. And you can imagine, you get quite a bit of income if you're renting these individually. And because we are in such a tight rental market, a lot of people are looking at these shared living spaces to be able to afford rentals. And they're not necessarily cheap, they're $200 a week up to $350 in Queensland. Some of them are up to $400, $420 a week, which are quite large. Like I said, they're almost the size of a small studio, generally fully furnished. So, you can see here there a lot of these sort of rooming houses, you have the option of converting an existing house, which may be like a 4-bedroom, a rumpus plus a study type, to go, okay, I could actually convert this into a 6-bedroom rooming house. And you've got to do it the right way with the right sort of regulations and licensing. But, for a house that was maybe yielding, let's just say $500-$600 a week, if you're renting out 6 bedrooms, so suddenly they're, let's say, $300 a week. So that's almost 3 times as much in income, right? From a numbers, that looks incredibly attractive. However, here's the part. These are the things that we need to consider. Moss, maybe I'll hand it over to you now to be bad cop.
I'll play the bad cop. I think you gave me a perfect sales pitch that majority of the converting rooming house guys basically give, right? So that is the pitch that you get. Instead of you getting $400 per week, you would be getting $300 per week from each room. So that's $1,800 per week. You're not building a granny flat at the back, which is costing you $150,000 to $200,000. You're only spending money to convert, which would be somewhere between $60,000 to say $140,000. And so all of that naturally sounds quite well, right? So how do you distinguish? And so this is where the magic happens, right? When you think about the conversions on $60,000 to $140,000, while the gross yields are significantly high, the net yields are super low. And when I say about net yields, because these are not 6-bedroom, 6-bathroom, these are 6-bedroom, 2-bathroom where 6 tenants are sharing typically 2 bathrooms or maybe 3 bathrooms, where you're adding an extra bathroom or 2 extra bathrooms. The more bathrooms that you add, the more the conversion cost goes up as well. But think about it from this perspective. So you are paying the bills out of your pocket. Majority of the bills are not divided. So, you are taking up electricity, you're taking up gas, you're taking up internet. Those bills are not basically tenants' responsibility now. And so your net yields quite significantly drops. And so let's look at an example in this circumstance as well, similar to what we did for co-living properties. So if you're buying a property for, say, in Melbourne in today's time, say $800,000, and let's assume on a conservative basis, you're spending $80,000 in conversion, your total cash outlay is about $280,000. And for that price, $880, say, for example, you can build 6-bedroom, 2-bathroom, maybe 3-bathroom, rented at, say, $300 per week at $1,800 in total, or $94,000 a year. A lot of money walking through the door. But you take the management out and you take the operational expenses out, like electricity, gas, cleaning, etc., you're almost looking at 20 to 23% of operational cost in these, and between 15 to 20% of management fees onto these. Usually the one that are converted attracts a higher management fees, and sometimes people even charge 20-25% of management fees, similar to Airbnb charges, which basically means that out of the 94 that you are making, you're basically left with $54,000, right? And if you assume an 80% LVR and you take a mortgage out at, say, 7.5%, you're basically paying almost $50,000 towards mortgage. And so the money that's left behind is like $3,000 or $2,000. So start off really, really high and you say $100,000, it makes a lot more sense. It looks super cool. By the time you come to the bottom line, you're left with like literally $2,000. And with the cash outlay of almost $280,000 in property, right? And that's, again, you're stuck. No valuation increases. You have spent $80,000. That does not add to additional value to the property as well. And you're increasing the risk as well. So granny flats, at least, one family can basically rent it out, or, here you're assuming 6 rooms. What if 5 rooms are rented or 4 rooms are rented? Because these are old houses, repairs and maintenance basically goes up quite a bit as well. Because these are not brand new properties. And so you take all of these things into consideration. Majority of these houses would be slightly negatively geared. Now, again, I'm not saying that this is a bad strategy, right? Because understand that if you buy an $800,000 house and you put it as 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom and rent it out, you are basically losing almost $30,000 a year in rent. And so this is definitely better than that, right? When you compare it. But is it a good spend of money from an investment perspective? I think that's the logic that we are questioning today.
Yeah, and so this is a similar thing which we spoke about with the granny flats. Like if you're buying right now in today's market and you're having to spend money to convert, then you're not going to necessarily value up to what you spent. So, potentially you've overcapitalized again from that aspect as well. I think the thing is to also understand that often if it's not a purpose-built rooming house, because, and I say it and it doesn't sound very nice, but I sort of look at conversions almost like a little bit like Frankenstein houses, because like putting a random bathroom here or whichever. I mean, some of the conversions can be very, very well done. So don't get me wrong, they're not necessarily Frankenstein, but there are homes out there. If people haven't done it well and you haven't had a professional do it, it can be a little bit Frankenstein-y. So it's the rental yield isn't as high as it would be a place that is purpose built. However, all right, this is good cop. Can I go into good cop phase now? All right.
Yeah, please. Okay. Yes,
so,
yes.
Similar to the granny flats, if you've held the property for 10 years, 15 years, or whatever that might be, in a fantastic spot, but you've got this tiny little red brick house that's not necessarily tiny, maybe actually a decent size house, but you're only renting it out as a four bedroom for $600, but there's plenty of space to be able to do a renovation and a conversion, and you've got plenty of equity in the property, then it potentially makes sense to convert it to a rooming house. And you can take advantage of the increase in yield and the increase in the equity as well to help you actually create more of that rental yield. But effectively, you're doing a renovation, and it's not going to be necessarily $80,000. You're probably going to be looking at a few, $150,000, give or take. And so there is, you know, it at the end of the day, you've got to be able to look at if you've got a current portfolio of properties in really good locations with good equity, but the yields are really right. You can, like, if it's in the right location, if there's enough demand, and so that's the other thing we haven't really touched on too much is there an actual demand for that sort of housing and in the area? Yes, there is in general really good demand overall, but obviously there's going to be better demand if you're close to transport, if you're close to employment hubs, if you're close to educational hubs, you know, and also places where generally the rents are quite high, but people, you know, you've got places where singles or couples are looking for housing, but they can't find anything that's affordable. Then, you know, doing your research around whether you're going to be able to fill those rooms up. The great thing, I mean, I think we've talked about rooming houses many times now. The great thing is that even if you do have 6 bedrooms and one isn't rented, generally because there's such a high demand, if it's a good property that's been set up well, it's decorated well, it's actually inviting and it's well managed, then, you know, you'll always have a pretty high level of occupancy in there. And so, you know, it's from a diversification point of view, your income's going to be more diversified. Like I said, you know, 100%. You do need to be able to see. I don't necessarily think it's a good idea to buy a property now and convert it because you're not going to get that uplift. And I think it's a good idea if you've had it in your portfolio for a while, you've got equity and you can leverage that equity to convert it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I think golden words. I think you've wrapped it up really, really well. And if you are thinking about going brand new, right? So it just makes a lot more sense to go custom. Just naturally makes a lot more sense. Don't go around thinking about, oh, I'm going to buy a house and build a granny at the back. That strategy, I would rather prefer that with the same amount of money, you basically go for a splitter block. And so you save the house at the front and build a house at the back that you can subdivide. And that subdivision can, you know, it could be an Airbnb or it could be a roaming house or it could be something else. Because the amount of money that you're spending in doing granny versus an extra house is potentially an extra $50,000 in the value of the property. And so say, for example, if you buy a house, which you can add a granny at the back, it's costing you, say, $550, you would potentially get a house in the same suburb where you can put another house at the back for probably $600,000. And so, you know, for that extra $50,000, you're getting a better value product. You can do a lot more with it. You can convert it into a splitter block, sell the house at the front, keep the house at the back. And so that's a much more smarter strategy to play. And, you know, it gives you a lot more exit strategies in relation to Airbnb or roaming houses. Another thing that I say to people, and this is, you know, predominantly very common in Perth, is that look at better floor plans, right? So instead of you going full scale Frankenstein conversions, split the house into 2 areas. And I know we've talked about this when we were talking about the SMSF episode, where there is a 1-bedroom self-contained unit and a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom. You're spending like $10,000 or $15,000 in the property by creating 2 separate access, 2 separate meters, and you rent out to 2 separate people. I think it's the easiest and the most convenient way of doing that. And so you're combining 3 strategies into one. You're changing the front house with 2 tenancies in place, you're splitting, and then you're building something at the back, you know, maybe an Airbnb or a rooming house. Yeah. I think that is a much more powerful thinking than just, you know, buying for, hey, I'm going to build a granny at the back, or I'm going to convert it into a rooming house in itself.
Yeah, I think that the key thing about what we're looking to advocate, in particularly in this podcast, is just to be able to give people an idea that there is more than just your traditional house and land.
100%.
You know, it's not necessarily here. We're not necessarily here to overwhelm people. I know it can feel a little bit overwhelming if all you've been sold and told about is buy a house, 4-bedroom house, you know, rent it out to a family, rent and pop that in your portfolio, and that's it. Don't do anything. Don't touch it. I guess what we're advocating here is educate yourself, understand that there is more and there are different strategies. And if you're not quite sure what's going to work for you, reach out to people who can guide you on that. Reach out to people who are experienced in that space. And this is for anything, right? We only know what we know, and we don't know what we don't know, right? Until until we make the step to be able to educate ourselves, to surround ourselves with people who know more than we do and learn and implement in action. So, like today we talked about granny flats and rooming houses, and it's something that a lot of people are looking for different options to increase the yield in the current climate. Run some numbers. Again, if you don't know and you're overwhelmed and you can't figure out the direction, speak to someone, whether it's someone like Moss or another person that's your financial advisor, people that are experienced in that property space and are growing portfolios and using different strategies. So definitely.
Golden words.
Thank you. And it's really more because I do it for myself. I do it, you do it for yourself and your clients as well. It's so that we can all grow in our wealth together and support each other. So it's good that you guys are thinking in this direction. There are just some considerations that you need to take to be able to go, is it the right one for me?
Definitely. And look, I think that's a perfect close for viewers and listeners who are out there. If you have tried and tested some of these strategies, drop into the comments. Or if there is anything else or any new strategies that we haven't come across, you want the stereotype to be broken or you want us to talk about, feel free to drop it into the comments or drop us an email at info@helpmebuy.com.au. Thank you for listening to us today. Be kind, stay safe, keep investing. This is Cheryl and Moss checking out.
Take care, everyone.